Hi everyone! Jordi and I both got to try on Vision Pro at WWDC this year, so we wanted to chat about our perspective using it as developers. But first, let's start with some quick introductions.
I'm Jordi Bruin from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I'm an indie developer for Apple platforms, where I make a bunch of stuff, made 20 different apps over the last few years. And I just try to make stuff that's useful for people and that's fun to work on. And usually that's stuff that's new. So the Vision Pro really fits in that box.
Yeah. No, I'm very excited to hear what you what I've built for this, but we'll get there eventually. My name is Malin. I'm originally from Sweden, if you pick up on the Swedish accent, but I live in Vancouver, Canada, and I work together with my partner, who you see in the background, Kai. We are building our own apps. One is called Orbit, which is a time tracking and invoicing app. Another one is Mercury, which is a weather app. And we also work on different fun client projects. And I think we were both just fortunate to get to WWDC a couple of weeks ago now. And we were even more fortunate to be...
to actually get to try the Vision Pro. Yeah. So a little bit of context. There was this temporary building that Apple set up for demos, mostly meant for press, but also there were some slots for developers. And what the demo basically was a 30-minute walkthrough of some of the features.
So for people who don't know sort of the WW format this year, it is a bit different from other WWDCs. We were actually at Apple Park. They started with that last year. And everyone who were there got I'd call it a hands-off experience, because it was very much like an experience where you were able to see the device and look at it, but you weren't allowed to touch anything. I think you were even told off if you touched the table that the devices were standing on.
There was two people standing at every little section of Vision Pro and making sure you don't get too close. And
yeah. But they were very friendly. But I mean it's like expensive devices. I see why you wouldn't want everyone to go up and touch them.
Especially not 6-7 months before it's released.
So that was the first day. So we had the keynote, we had the State of the Union, and then we have that experience in the Steve Jobs Theater. And I think that was already amazing. Getting to see the Steve Jobs Theater, getting to be at Apple Park, it just feels so it's such a cool place. So I think you're already super enthusiastic just from that experience. But then, on the Tuesday, we were fortunate to, I think you get a session in the morning, I got a session in the afternoon. And we didn't really know what it would be. For me, I assume it started. We haven't really talked about if we had the same experience. So I think we should start from the beginning, and if there's anything.
Sure.
So I think for me, it was very Apple-y of an experience in the first place. I was just told to go on this golf cart, and then they drove me somewhere. And I'd never been on a golf cart, so that was really cool in the first place. And I didn't realize how fast golf carts were going. That quite quickly.
Yeah, and it's mostly because Apple Park is quite big. So from the entrance all the way to the other side of the ring where this building was, I think if you would walk, it would be a good 15 minutes, probably. 10 minutes, 10, 15 or something if you're slow. On the way there, I had this very slow golf cart because it was early in the morning, so there was a lot of people. But on the way back, it was raining, and I had a really fast driver, so we went back in 1 minute or so. I guess we both got driven up to this building, and before that, I didn't really know if I was going to get to try it or if there was a presentation or something. But then when you got to the building, it was basically okay, so you're going to try this out for a little bit.
So what did you think about the building? I think I was very impressed.
Yeah, from the outside, it's just a big white square. But from the inside, it seemed like a super high fashion store, like a Gucci store or something, with carpets, super nice, fancy couches, a few Vision Pros just standing there and no one looking at it, because everyone who was there had either just had a demo or was working for Apple. So all of a sudden, it wasn't as special anymore. If you compare it to the day before, everyone was
think it was
getting
special, but yes.
Well, but if you compare it to the day before, everyone was trying to get as close as possible, and here it was just there's just a few lying there. So then I entered, and I guess you as well. We had to do a scan of our face, which is for a few things. So we actually had to do 2 scans. Like one is for the spatial audio to determine like where your ears are. And the other one was basically determine your face shape, because based on that, the lights seal, which is like the thing that touches your face, apparently there's going to be different ones and different sizes. Yeah. And I guess they use that to figure out like what's your closest size. And I wasn't wearing glasses, so you probably had an extra thing you had to do, right?
Yeah. So for me, it's a bit different. Similar, I scanned my face, but then I got into this other room and I took my glasses off, and it was similar to at an optometrist where they have the machine and they can read what your prescription is. I wasn't sure. I was actually, once they started telling me like, okay, you're going to get to try the Vision Pro, I was a little bit nervous of like, what if they don't have lenses for my prescription? Like, what if I get there and they're like, no, you're like, you have too high prescriptions, you have too much astigmatism, this isn't going to work. But no, they just scanned it and they were like, oh yeah, cool, we're good.
Yeah, and then I guess we both got invited to our room, separately, of course, like separate sessions. And yeah, there was a few people from Apple there, a table with a Vision Pro there in the middle, and then basically the demo started.
And the room was also very much like a very nicely laid out living room. Yeah.
It was a couch, there were a few chairs, a little table, some closets. So it was a pretty good mimic of a small studio apartment living room, I would say. Obviously very, very well lit and everything. So probably very good conditions for doing AR stuff. But yeah, it didn't feel like I was just in a plain room. And I guess not everyone watching this has probably seen or heard like what the entire demo was like. So maybe we can go through it a little bit step by step, just highlight some of our favorite parts along the way.
What did you think about the setup process?
So a little bit of context, like when you set up when you put on the Vision Pro for the first time, it needs to detect like what your eyes are looking at. So there's this little like iris scan, eye gaze tracking thing where you basically have to look at a few dots and like look at them for a second. First with a black background, then with a white background, so that they can change, like look on different pupillary, like how your pupils open up, I guess. After that, you have to take your hands, put them in front of you for maybe a second. I don't even remember if it was more than that.
It was. Like, I felt like I barely reached out in front of me, and it was done.
Exactly, and then I think then the famous Apple Hello got drawn in 3D, and then you just saw the room. It was just like full pass through, and that was it. Yeah,
and like it's such a nice, like it's very much similar. Like it's a similar setup experience to other Apple devices, like when you set up your first Mac. I'd say it's even simpler than that, because there were, I mean, of course, we didn't have to log into like our iCloud accounts and those type of things. But I think it very much, like, it was just a very pleasant experience, and you got in there very quickly. And I think compared to other headset experience I've had, it's always like a little bit more finicky, where I have to adjust the pupil distance myself, or I have to do some type of more of a sort of
calibration,
create the boundaries around me and actually draw my room. But there was nothing like that, and I thought that was really smooth. That like I couldn't see any boundaries, I didn't have to set up any boundaries. It was just
exactly. It was very much seamless. Like the whole scanning the room process was like not shown at all to the user. And I think you've probably tried some ARKit stuff in the past, and there usually, if you see the visualization of the room, you see all the meshes of, okay, this is where a table starts, this is where the walls is. And I think Apple's very much trying to go with just don't care about that stuff kind of approach, which you also kind of see with some of the immersive stuff. So the Vision Pro can do AR, where you can just see the rest of the room and objects in the room, or it can go into this full immersion, which you probably saw in the videos as well, right? With when you're at a different location, you're sitting next to a lake or something. But from what we've seen in the session videos at WWDC, is basically if a user is in full immersion mode and they start walking around, then the immersion basically fades away and you see the room again. So where other devices allow you in theory to just like walk around in a full VR space until you get to the boundaries, Apple's basically saying, okay, there's just not going to be any boundaries, because we're not making this device right now for a situation where you're walking around without seeing the room. But yeah, like in terms of how the scanning of the room worked, I didn't notice any of that at all. But yeah, then basically you just saw the room. So there was video pass through of the room. I really thought that the visual quality was really good. You could still see it was video, like especially here, but it was really good. And as soon as objects, like digital objects, came into view, which were super sharp, I didn't really notice it anymore. But it was a few minutes later when I looked down. So I looked at my hands, and there the pass-through was like, holy shit. I was like completely blown away. Because before that, I was just looking here. And then at one point I looked at my hands, and my hands just really felt like I was just looking at my hands. And I think because there's 2 dedicated cameras at the bottom aimed directly there, I think there's probably maybe higher resolution there because the other cameras have to cover more.
Yeah, I saw you writing. You wrote about this somewhere. Someone asked about it online, and you added this comment. And I didn't.
You didn't notice the difference
as much, but I did feel. I felt like everything right in front of me was super clear as well. I didn't feel like that was. I didn't notice any difference anywhere around me.
Okay.
And I think that is very impressive from a technical perspective, because there are so many cameras and you don't see any type of distortion or any type of clipping.
Or stitching or something, no.
Yeah.
Because you would assume there's 2 cameras that way, and then at one point the cameras need to be combined in some way.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, but no, everything you looked at just looked real in terms of the perspective, and a lot of questions were also about like how big was the field of view. For me, I didn't really notice the field of view ending. Obviously, it ends somewhere, but because the experience was so good, I didn't really notice it or care about it.
I had a similar experience. I didn't pay attention to it at first, and I think that is a good thing. That means that it wasn't something that was in the way. I did sort of realize halfway through the demo, like, oh wait, I know that this is usually an issue. I should look, like, where are the boundaries? Like, where does the screen stop? And then I paid more attention to it, and like, you can see where the screen ends. But people have asked that as well, and I think I compare it to, if I would compare it to an Oculus, which I believe has around 100 degrees field of view. It felt slightly wider than that, so maybe 110, but not. I don't think it was. I don't think it was like 120, but it was, like you said, nothing that was in the way or bothering me. But one interesting thing for me is that when I'm wearing glasses, my field of view of like corrected vision, it's already limited. Like I don't know, maybe it's like 90 degrees. Or something,
right. It's
80, 90 degrees.
And it's only this narrow, so like
exactly.
You have a bunch of...
Exactly, yeah. And everything I see here, like it's in my field of view, and I like if reflex, like by a reflex, I would know that there's something there. But if someone shows up here, I wouldn't identify who, like I wouldn't see their face. I wouldn't really see who they are. But if I have this, my corrected vision is actually a lot wider than wearing glasses. So that was a bit...
And I think that's also interesting because all the other headsets are really from, the content is the main thing. And then if you do pass-through, it's more of a temporary mode. Whereas here, the pass-through is always there. And then you put content on top of or like in front of the pass-through. And that creates this nice effect where it doesn't really matter if, for example, the video quality is not like 20K or something, because all the digital things are in front of you and they're super sharp. And the rest becomes just sort of a background, because also when you're looking at something, you don't focus on everything else behind it. It blurs in real life as well.
I wanted to get back to sort of that experience. I think the first thing we got to try were the more window-based apps that were like it would traditionally have been like an iPad app or something that had been adopted to a window app. And when I first heard of that in the keynote, I think from like a developer point, I was a bit concerned, like, oh, is it just going to be like an iOS app on the Mac and it doesn't feel at home? Or is this going to feel like the experience you get because like it's good to have the app there, but it's not the perfect experience. But for me, wearing it and actually using it with those window apps, that felt like an experience in itself. Like that felt like how the device should be used. It didn't feel like a compromise that the apps were available because they hadn't been converted to a fully immersive experience. Like, no, it should be. And like, that's how it really clicked for me what type of device it is, that it is about using a computer in a different way. And it is about using the apps, the productivity apps, and all the apps that we're familiar with, but in a more flexible way and in a way where you can really just set it up to your space. And I think that was something super exciting for me from a developer perspective, because I felt like I already have my like iPad apps, my iOS apps, and I felt like they will actually fit in and feel like apps that should be on this device.
Yeah, so I think there was about 12 apps on the home screen, which were some of the basic apps that Apple makes, or like the main apps. Point to note, though, is that even though they were windowed apps, they were not just like a copy-paste from the iPad OS version. So, for example, the first app I got to try was the Photos app. The main interface looked quite similar. You had like this big grid of images, but then as soon as you clicked on a photo, the way that like took like main stage and like everything else faded out, and there was this black overlay on the rest of the world, so the photos became clearer. Like there's these little things.
I wouldn't say black. It was more like a see-through, like a sunglass layer, right?
Yeah, like subtle, but like to put the focus on the photos that were in front of you. And like I think if you would just take your iPad Photos app, then it would just be like a navigation bar at the top, like this tab bar at the bottom where you can scroll through. It was not like that. So it's there's definitely things you need to do to make it seem like more seamless, I guess, with the rest of the world. And I guess we'll have to see once the SDK comes out later this month, like what kind of tools we'll have for that. I think it will probably be quite similar to, there's this new thing where if you put your phone like in landscape mode, when it's locked, you can see your widgets there. And one of the things there is that there's this new dynamic background kind of thing where it can like, depending on if it's a widget, you can give it a color, otherwise you don't. So maybe there's an API like that where you can just say, okay, if it's viewed on the vision, like don't show these background elements and only show the content. But I think if you just have a good iPad or like a good native iOS app that just uses native components, you're going to get a lot for free there already. So you'll have a lot of like a good starting point.
Yeah. I could also imagine it working similarly to like the approach that you take if you're using SwiftUI for macOS and iOS apps. I think there's a lot of like the tooling is the same to use SwiftUI as one framework, but there's still an expectation,
different
at least for me, to make some adaptations and make it feel at home. So I think it will be on a similar level there. You might have your sort of leaf views, like your lower level views, your photo or your like a particular view that can be reused. But then I think you want to sort of reconfigure it and change like what the chrome around it looks like and how it behaves on the different platforms.
So I guess we both got to see the same videos and photos. Started with just some nice photos, which, I mean, beautiful people, well photographed. Okay, yeah, it's nice. And then we got the panorama, which I think is cool. But the thing is like, okay, it's 2D. So it's like, okay, you're just looking at a big picture. And I guess the pictures you see are just like random nice pictures that you have not been. Like, I think if it's a photo you actually took or it's a person you actually know, it's going to be more emotional. You're going to have a bigger connection to it. But
one thing I feel about that, like with the, one thing I think that demo did really well was to actually show how there's no limit in the screen size. Like anything can take the size it wants to take. If you look at the panorama photo on a phone, it's becoming, you have the bars around it because it doesn't fit. Whereas here it was just like it takes the space it needs. And I think that we will probably get to that later. Like when you watch a movie, there's no letterboxing, right? You can watch movies in whatever aspect ratio it was filmed in, and you don't get any letterboxing. It's just because the screen and the window adapts to it. But then we did get to see the 3D photos and 3D videos, which I think a few people have asked me about, just how the experience was. And I like to compare it to a hologram, but colored, like not a see-through hologram like you have in Star Wars, but it felt that hologram style in terms of like how things were laid out.
I think the same. So I got to see one where the kids were blowing out the candles. And one in front of a campfire with a bunch of friends. Did we have the same? Yeah. And obviously there was a lot of comments from people about the child one, like, are you going to take a picture at your child's birthday? I think we should leave that discussion for when this device is actually out, because I don't think anyone can really judge that without having seen it.
Who knows what other devices will be out at that point? I wouldn't be surprised if the next iPhone has a camera that's capable of taking those type of photos.
Yeah, and even if there's no iPhone, I think there's value in taking these. But I think the nice thing is especially that it's a different type of video compared to anything else we've seen, like the 3D aspect, and it really feels like it's there. And obviously we're just looking at actors, so there's no emotional connection there. But if it's someone you know, if it's your real child, I think it's actually quite profound, like how how it felt. And
I think with the animals is probably a good example. Like, I think they should have. That's where I can see it more. Like, my dog probably, if I would have a dog, it probably wouldn't care if I look at it through a device. It's just happy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's
that
a
would have
moment
probably been
a
a less controversial example, maybe, to give.
Yeah.
I think this is definitely. I mean, we both got to see 2 videos. I think it looked really nice. I would imagine it will be really cool to have these kind of memories in the future. Am I going to like take a lot of pictures with the thing on and a lot of videos with the thing on? We'll have to see. I think that really depends on, are you going to wear it around other people? And that's going to be a process. But I think it's cool that the technology is there and that it allows some stuff that's like not possible on other devices, on flat screen 2D devices. And I think we'll get to that later as well with some of the kind of apps you can make, because besides just the 2D apps, the windowed apps we saw, you can also like add 3D elements to your apps. So this can be, you have a 2D window, and then maybe you have a 3D globe or a 3D object that pops out. And not necessarily in a way like, all right, there needs to be 3D in every screen, but in some cases it's just useful. If you have an app that tracks your workouts and you want to see the route that you took, if that map you see there is like a 3D map and you see the elevation and stuff as well, it's obviously like objectively better because it displays more information in a 3D object than in a 2D one, for example. So I think even if your app is not necessarily a full 3D thing, there's a lot of 3D little elements you can probably add to make use of that.
And I don't think every app makes sense to be 3D either. I think like I mentioned, like there are lots of productivity tools that you just want to have on this ecosystem, like on this platform that is already part of the Apple ecosystem. And I think I like how there are the 3 different modes you can create. For people who haven't watched the Dub sessions, you can create 3 different type of apps. One is the window app, which is similar to what you would have on an iPad, and then you have the volumes, which is basically if you add some 3D elements, like you mentioned, and then the full space is when it's actually occupying your whole sort of surrounding. Or I think it's the definition might be more that you can't have other apps running at the same time. So, for example,
your app is the only app that takes up space.
Yeah. And you could also go between those modes, which I thought was pretty cool. So you might have like something where, like, let's take your run, for example. If you have a running app and you want to, you might tap a map, and then that could bring in like a full screen, a full scene experience. And then you see like a 3D object in front of you and you can sort of move it around. And that would be quite a nice transition between those as well.
Yeah, or you click on this map and then this map takes up the whole room and it's like a full, almost like a certain scale of the map. And then you tap it again and it fades out again, becomes small, and the rest of the apps become visible. So there's definitely not this expectation that your app is only going to be one thing or the other. It seems like it will fluidly go between one or the other. So, for example, photos, it first was just a window. You see the different photos, then you tap on a photo, and then it becomes a full screen experience, and you're fully immersed in that particular photo, and then you click it again and you go away. So there's definitely this. I mean, with Windows as well, like if you have one window and then another window pops up for the same app and you position it in a different way, you could say that that's 3D, even though it's like separate 2D windows. But having like multiple windows of your app or multiple elements of your app that you can position in different places. If you're a gaming app, for example, you could have the main game here and maybe the stats of your characters on the right side, and I actually want them on the bottom, or position the mini map here and make the mini map really big for me, or some people maybe just want it very small. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff we will be able to do there. And I think you'll have to try it out and experience it, I think, to be able to really understand what works for your app. So I don't think we'll be able to see the full potential until the SDK comes out, until the dev kits come out, and until people actually get like long hands-on time with the device so that they can really figure out what works for them.
Yeah. No, I think we'll talk a bit more about the sort of developer, what you can do now, and sort of the developer story. But you touched a bit on sort of the windowing and how you can move windows around. I wanted to talk about that interaction model like the eye to finger, like the gesture of looking at something and then tapping it and the tracking of that. And just as so for people, I don't think we mentioned that. So we got to try in this demo. The focus was on the eye and hand tracking. We didn't do the voiceover or the keyboard. So I'm still curious to see how the keyboard works or how it works to connect it with the Mac. But I think just trying that, the eye tracking in combination with like tapping, that interaction model was amazing. Like I was so surprised how quickly I was able to pick it up and how intuitive it felt. It felt
definitely.
like when you used your finger on your like piece of glass phone for the first time. It just feels so natural to do that. And I was very impressed by like how quickly it detects where I'm looking without me even thinking of the fact that I didn't feel like I have to focus on where I'm looking.
Yeah, because the first time we tried this was basically the introduction was done. We saw the room and we pressed the digital crown and then the home screen popped up so you could see the icons. And then by just looking at the icons, which you automatically do, like the one that you're gazing on like becomes a little bit bigger, 3D comes forward. So without doing anything, you're already doing the navigation and the interaction basically. And then the little tap you do with your fingers to select stuff. Was just, I would say that in 2 minutes, it felt like easy and seamless. And within 10 minutes, it just felt second nature. Like there's no other way to control these kind of devices.
No, I felt like probably like it just clicked for me within like the first couple of minutes that like, this is a very intuitive way of using this. And it didn't feel like a 2-step flow. It didn't feel like 2 different pieces. It just felt like I looked and I tap in the same way as you move your cursor on your Mac and then you click.
Exactly. Yeah.
And one thing that I was a bit. You're good.
No, at first I was a bit like, okay, where do I put my finger? But you can just put it below you as well, like on your lap. Maybe 3 or 4 times I had like a mistap, but that could have been maybe because my finger was underneath, like covered by something. But yeah, that was not like, that was the exception by far. And I think it's also like something, even on a MacBook, you sometimes misclick, right? So I think that's something we'll get super used to super quickly. But
did you try with both your hands or did you only use your dominant hand?
I'm not sure. I don't think I remember. Well, I don't remember, but I think I mostly use my dominant hand because there's some quite like micro movement. So there's at the bottom of every window or space, or well, I guess not every space or volume necessarily, but definitely at every window, there's a little bar similar to the bar you have on your home screen on your phone, and you look at that. It kind of like becomes a little bit bigger so that you know that you're looking at it, and then you do this, and as soon as you do that, you're in sort of like drag mode, I would say. And then the controls are basically like your hand movement. So if you want to put the window a little bit further away, you just put it a little bit further away. If you to the left, to the right. And this is quite like precise movements, but it never like jittered for me. It was always like, all right, let me put it here. Let me put it here. And then if you look at the bottom right of the view, there's a little thing you can drag to make it bigger or smaller. And then to the left of the bar, there's a little button you use to close the apps. Because unlike iOS, here you actually want to close apps and not like leave them all open in your multitasker, because it's just a different environment, because they're actually taking up your space, literally. So it's more similar to on your Mac when you hide windows, I'd say.
I think one thing you touched on there is like dragging things around, and I didn't think of it that much when I was using it, but afterwards I realized how quickly that felt intuitive as well. I was able to pick up a window by looking at the sort of bar in the bottom, tapping my fingers, and then I just instinctively sort of dragged my hand a little bit out of the way, and I moved my head to the other side and looked where I want to place it. And I felt confident that the window was still where I left it. And I even kept on moving my hand. I even kept on moving my hand. And then I looked back, and it was exactly where I expected. And that felt very much
it's really like the real world, like you would be doing this with a real thing. And then you look there, you know it's still there because your finger's still there. And you could do this, and then it becomes, definitely.
Exactly. You would never look at your book as you move around to know where you keep it.
To make sure that it sticks to you. No. And I think that was for me one of the main things which made me so enthusiastic about the device, where those little details, like just the core interaction, if there's anything there that like 10% of the time gets in your way, then the rest can be so nice and everything, but that's just like, it takes you out of this flow and makes you feel, okay, I'm using a device and not like just a tool or like
totally.
a real thing.
I agree. I think it felt so, like everything felt so natural, and the fact that there was nothing jiggering, nothing freezing, like no frames being dropped, it just made it feel like a very natural experience.
Yeah. I mean, so we got to try the photos. There were a few more like content-based apps. We got to see like an Avatar 3D movie in a cinema. For me, it was nice. It's like going to a 3D movie, but it's like super bright instead of having like the shades that you normally have, which make everything dark.
Yeah, I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, this is what they imagine 3D to be like, and it actually is. It's like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had Apple's, they have this 180 degrees stereoscopic content. So sports scenes, but also nature documentaries where you could see like pandas walking by. And because they're filmed in 3D, they actually feel real instead of just like a 2D video. And what else was there? What kind of other video content
so there was? Before that, there was the meditation experience. Which I think was very cool. I don't normally meditate, but I really felt like it was calming, and I felt like that was also a really cool experience where it's very smoothly moved you from being in the real world to being completely immersed. It's this sort of animation of this flower type 3D object that sort of just keeps on growing and expanding, and then it goes bigger and bigger until it sort of starts to surround you, and then it's also becomes black around you, like your whole world. And at the end, it sort of feels like you're just like floating in this space. It was
very intense. I thought, okay, we're just going to look at mindfulness, right?
But
it starts with this little flower in your room. You could just see the rest of your room, and very slowly it like took over. And then by the end, you just were in a full VR environment, basically. So I think it was a good showcase of this transition between being in a room, being immersed, being like in the real world, and then just something taking over if it's necessary. And obviously this is for relaxing purposes, but you can imagine you're watching a soccer game or something, and then a goal is scored, and then in the replay of that goal, all of a sudden the whole world transforms into next to the goalpost, and you're standing there and you see it happening around you, and then you go back into the game again and the game is there. Like it felt like those kind of experiences are definitely going to be possible already in the first version, because there's obviously some limitations to what the first version will be able to do. For example, it's not really possible to get access to the where the user is watching for privacy reasons, but the camera feed is also not available. So you won't be able to make an app where, at least from what we know now based on the sessions, where it recognizes something in the world and then put something next to that because it recognizes that it's that particular thing. But we can do stuff like scene reconstruction, where the Vision Pro will determine, okay, this is what is around you, and these are the meshes of the object, and this is a couch, and this is a chair, but you won't be able to see like what the actual chair looks like, for example, as a developer. Okay. But even with that, you can still like make a ton of experiences that are going to be really interesting. I think it's also maybe, besides the privacy aspect, I think it's also just a good choice to not give all tools immediately from day one, because I think AR is also something that people will need to learn, like, all right, this is how it works. This is what kind of interactions there are. And also for developers, it's always nice to slowly get used to these technologies.
But I wouldn't say, that said, I don't think there's a learning curve. Because it is like you interacting with things.
It's not necessarily a learning curve as in, but I mean more like, let's say you put on this Vision Pro and then there's an app you install and that just like takes over your entire world and you don't see the normal world anymore. And like there's stuff like coming at you and distracting you. That can be quite intense, I think. So it's a new technology for a lot of people. Like there's hundreds, billions of people that have never used a VR headset at all. So imagine going from like nothing to this. I think it will sort of like similar when widgets came to the home screen on the iPhone. They were limited, but they gave us like a taste of, okay, these things we can do. And then developers made all these nice, useful widgets that were not interactive, but you could still like use them for a lot of things. And now they become interactive, and it's like, oh, now we can do go a step beyond, but people are already like super familiar with widgets, for example. And I think with something like this new, because it's obviously not something that's going to be mainstream in the next 5 years just because of the price and everything, right? So I think it's better to have this more guided trajectory there. And even then, there's like still so much we can do. So
I think I wanted to go back to, I think there were two more things that we got to try out. Actually, three. And I got the questions about this one. We got to use Safari. And that was sort of the first one where it was heavily text-based. And many people have asked me, because I also use other VR devices where text is pixelated. It's often pixelated, but also if you look at it, like if you tilt your head slightly, it becomes slightly distorted, and it can be really hard to read in a VR environment. But here, I did not have any problem seeing the text. Like it felt, I would compare it to like me using my 4K display in front of me, like my Mac display. It felt that clear, and I didn't feel like it would be exhausting at all to read like entire pages of SwiftUI documentation or something on it. Like
which is going to be super important, right? Because a lot of these apps are going to just be text-based because it's not necessarily like a 3D only device. So if you look at your messages app, it's just going to be messages and maybe some photos from friends. But if the text would not be nicely readable, you won't want to use this. Yeah. If you open Mercury, if it ever comes to the Vision Pro, who knows?
You will.
And you look at the weather report and you see the numbers and everything, and they're a bit grainy. It's like, that's not what you want. So this was a super important part of it, even though it's not the first thing you think about when you try VR. Like you think immersive 3D objects running around you, colorful sound and everything. But like same, like I thought the text it never bothered me at all. It was sharp. It was just like what I expected it to be. And then afterwards we got a FaceTime call. So some other person from Apple somewhere in the building probably called us on FaceTime. A little notification popped.
Yeah. I was very, I think I was very suspicious of that, because I was like, there's no way there's actually going to be a real person calling me. I thought it was like a really, first when the call first came in and the person started chatting, I'm like, I was still suspicious. I'm like, is this a really good demo? And they managed to like feed this demo my name so that they're able to like say hi, Malin. But I was way too suspicious.
I think that would be a lot more work than just having someone doing the call.
But it must have been like then when I realized like, no, this is a real person calling me. That's when my sort of like, I'm a bit of a like organizational nerd when it comes to like organizing events and conferences. I'm like, wait, how did they do this? They must have like, did they have dedicated people calling everyone, trying it on? How did they time this? It was very impressive that they were able to actually do a real FaceTime call.
I get what you mean, because I had a bit the same. So initially it was, okay, I see this person, and this was the square version. So there was a new version that they showed at the State of the Union, which is more like the spatial version. But this was the square version where you see the persona. I thought it looked nice. Maybe like some parts were not as like lifeful. Like I wouldn't say lifeless, but these are the parts that move, and these are the parts they can actually get from the device. But I think this is also a case, like if I would have a FaceTime call with your persona, like I know who you are, I know what your face looks like. So there's much more like, yes, this is really Malin. Whereas this other person we'd never seen before, so we don't know her, right? And then at one point she brought up this freeform window. So she did share play, basically, and this window just showed up super seamless. That was for me like one of the top 4 moments, just to see like how easy it is to collaborate in this device, and to actually let me show you something. It was really like we're sitting next to each other. It's like, so look here, and then this, and you could draw on stuff, I guess. For me, the 3D, in that freeform demo, there was a 3D object, and that didn't load for me. I think in the demo, it normally would send over, and then you could see a 3D object, but it didn't load. So, I mean, obviously, I could still beta releases. But just the fact, like how it came in, I could see like if your app has anything that people would maybe want to show to someone else, you need to add SharePlay. Even if you don't do like full 2-hour SharePlay together watching video calls, but like if you, for example, let's get with Mercury, like your weather app. If you have a FaceTime call, oh, let's look at the weather. Oh, let me open Mercury, and then both of you see Mercury. It's like, oh, okay. And then you put it away again and you continue with your conversation. Similar to how I would look at my weather now and then show it to you in real life.
Yeah.
I think these metaphors to stuff in real life and how you interact with people in real life are going to be really big.
Yeah. I agree. And I think it's interesting how many pieces of sort of technology that we have learned about from like as developers for the last 3 years are now coming together in this device, and it all makes sense. It's like, I see why they made SharePlay or even Freeform. Like, this is a perfect device for Freeform. Like, it makes sense that it's here. And I mean, we'll also get into that, like the tooling, Swift UI, ARKit, and all of those things. It just everything comes together. Yeah.
Speaking of tooling, let's maybe go into some of the tooling stuff.
Yes.
Because
I just want to ask, what did you think about the final experience? In the end, we saw a portal opening, and I think that was really cool.
With the dinosaur. So you see a room, the window, this portal opens up, and there's like 3D virtual content on one of the walls on the room, and this little butterfly like landed on your finger, which was quite cool. When I moved my finger around, I could see that the butterfly was not like super fluid, like tracking it, but everything else with the hand tracking was really fluid. So I figured it's probably still work in progress. But then we got to walk around the room.
I held my finger wrong. I held it like, instead of like this way, I held it sideways a bit. So it landed a little bit like almost on the other finger. I'm like, I wanted to like redo it because I felt like I held it wrong, but then the rest of the experience was really, really cool.
Yes. So we got to walk around the room, which was seamless because you can see the room. So you don't really have to think, okay, am I in pass-through? Am I reaching my Guardian window? No, it's like just walk through the wall between the table and the Apple person sitting there. And then you could get close, and this dinosaur came out. And the typical VR experience, like you don't want to touch it, you don't want to get too close, it feels real.
Yeah.
I would have liked to touch it because I'm actually hearing afterwards like what it's like when you put your hand through it. Yeah. I didn't do that. So I really felt like
I think your brain gets tricked so quickly that like even like not because it's a dinosaur, but it's an object here. You shouldn't just put your hand through it.
No, exactly. And I think I also didn't want to ruin the demo experience or something by like trying to mess it up or something. No, but it worked really well. And so on Tuesday as well, besides this event, a bunch of developers, I think 3 groups of 200 people, I think, also got a demo of the actual development process at the Apple Developer Center, where they basically explained a bit of how the process works of developing for it. And I think you can kind of group it into a few things. So there's Swift UI Kit as well, but Apple's like really recommending you go with Swift UI development. This is for more regular apps, so to say. We can go a bit deeper later. Then Reality Kit, which is Apple's framework that they released, I would say 5-6 years ago or something, for creating 3D objects and 3D interactions and everything. Then there's AR Kit, which is like the full-blown, get information about the room around you, get scene reconstruction and everything, and use that in combination with Reality Kit. And then they talked about Reality Composer, which is Apple's tool for creating these 3D elements. So those were like Apple's main like technologies for developing for it. And then they also focused on Unity for a little bit, which is I think, as far as I know, the only third-party like engine that's officially supported. But the nice thing is that they can just like coexist together. So in your app, you can have like one window, which is Swift UI, and then another object, which is Unity. And one app can be Unity and the other app can be an AR Kit, Reality Kit combination thing. And they still share the same space, share the same, it all makes a lot of sense. And so,
No, I totally agree. I feel like all the tooling fits in here, and also how much work they have done in getting Reality Kit available in Swift UI directly seems like a really natural way of combining those two.
So basically you have a new reality view that you could just put in your stack wherever you want, and then you put your model in there and you can do stuff with that. And basically they showed us, okay, so this is your main app is a window. So you do that in Swift UI, just do a VStack. It looks like this. Let's make sure it looks nice. We give it a background to make it a little bit bigger. And then, let's add a 3D globe. Okay, let's just add a reality view in here. And then when you click on the globe, you transition to this immersive space. So they really showed like in a very thorough explanation. I think it was like an hour-long explanation of how we're looking at like just Xcode, just the simulator and explaining everything. We were not allowed to take photos during when like the simulator and everything was up, because the thing probably still work in progress. But yeah, it worked really well, and it seemed super simple. Just make window groups and scene groups and everything, and and so the SDK is coming out at the end of the month. So I guess you would probably be able to get your own apps up and running on a Vision Pro simulator in a minute or something.
Yeah, and I think that's
probably won't
thing,
look great.
I think the simulators seem really cool, and you will be able to have different type of rooms and different type of lighting setups to really test your apps and see how it looks like in those different conditions. Yeah, and I think that is really. If we don't have any devices to test it on, this seems like a really great way of being able to test them. Even though, of course, like I do think like this type of device, it's very different to be immersed in it and actually try it on. So I think it makes sense for developers to try it. But I think it's nice that you don't need to wear the headset while developing. But I mean, you can, and that's probably what I will do once I'm able to get a headset. I will use it. Like I'll use Xcode in there. I will be developing my Vision Pro or my Vision OS apps in Vision OS, because it's just amazing that you can do that. But it is still good that like in the end of this month, it sounds like we'll be able to get the simulators up and running, and we can actually start playing around with our apps.
Yeah, because when you get the Vision Pro, you'll be able to basically share your Mac screen to the Vision Pro, and it will display as a window. And then you can just have your own app on the right side. And then in Xcode, you run your app and it immediately runs on your Vision Pro. Yeah.
No, I think that would be really cool. And another thing from like the...
Oh, and sorry, one more thing. So with the simulator, you'll also be able to control it with a controller, like with a PlayStation controller or something, so you can walk around. Right. But what I can imagine is that the simulator will allow you to see, okay, do my views look well? And does it look nice and everything? And then you put on the headset and then you see, okay, what's the interaction and everything like? But once you know the interaction, and I guess because it's very similar to default iOS, like human interface guidelines and everything, like scroll views, buttons, certain sizes and everything. Like once you get a bit of an understanding of what a good user interface looks like, you probably don't need to go into the headset all the time to make sure your button looks well. But yeah, you might as well do it if you're just coding in the headset as well.
Yeah, no, I wanted to talk about the developer story as well, and I think I was very excited to see. This is a very different device from a VR. Like it's not a VR headset; it is spatial computing, right? It is a different device, and I think the fact that they don't have controllers like you traditionally would have in a VR headset makes it really feel like they are going for something else. This is a different experience in itself. And I think from a developer perspective, that was really cool. It feels like it is meant to be explored, and we can really think of how to use this type of interface the best for our apps rather than sort of having the presumption of what an app should be like because there are controllers. I think it was quite great to actually test it out and see how well the tracking works and see what you can do with that. And also, it doesn't feel like the device it's not meant that you should port your Oculus game to this device because, I mean, assets and stuff like that. You can get 3D assets and those things you can use. But it's not, it's really meant to be. It feels like the device is made for Apple developers to develop for. And it's something where we can really use the tools we have. We can add the apps that we already have and then add things on top of that. Like start out adding our apps like window apps. And I think that fits at home in the first place. But then from there, you can just explore those different levels. And I think you mentioned that earlier, like then you can go ahead and add your volumes and add something sticking out or add multiple windows at the same time for the same app. And then you have a button and you might become fully immersed.
Where a lot of the VR headsets come from like the gaming point of view.
Yeah.
And like, let's say there's some apps, maybe it feels like Apple starts with the apps and then you can also make games and everything. But this interface is, like they said as well, it's more of a tool and not a toy.
Totally.
So by taking that, like, and I think with the hands as well, like with controls, you have like, okay, click on this button and something happens. Click on this button, something happens. Click on this trigger. And here it's just, okay, you're just interacting with things. Just as you would in normal life. So and I think it'll be very interesting to see like if this first batch of apps that comes out, if they will just mostly be windowed or if people will start creating like their own custom experiences. Like you can come up with so many ways to approach a weather app, for example.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
and I think that's
you're
the
probably
cool thing.
Thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think that's the cool thing. You can really add more and more things. And I think I haven't spoken to a single developer, and I went to a lot of meetups throughout WWDC. Everyone wanted to build something for this, and I was very happy about that because it means that people are enthusiastic to be on this platform on like as early as they can, like even before it's released. They wanted to just get started.
Yeah, there was a lot of excitement in the air. I think it was also because like we couldn't get to try it except for some lucky people then. Which gives this sort of mystique, I think, as well. Like, all right, what can this thing do? Like, I'm hearing all these great stories because it was pretty much unanimously positive from all the people that tried it. So yeah, speaking of like what we're going to build, maybe we can end this and give a little sneak peek on like what we are going to be building, like you and I separately. So you want to start?
Sure. I think I'm gonna, like, as I start building, I'm probably gonna come up with like 10 more. But for now, we have sort of Kai and I. We have 4 things that we want to work on. The first thing is our existing apps. We want to make Orbit available. I don't think there will be a lot of additional things apart from the window app there. I think one thing we want to do is to just make it feel at home on the device. So I think having I think it's called ornaments. So if you can have certain buttons that are sort of decorating the window itself and it's sort of outside, those are the ornaments. I think that will just make the app feel at home on the device. And then also, like, we have some charts and some graphs in the app. I think maybe adding some of them, giving some of them a bit more of a 3D effect there, I think will already make it feel like a really nice app on the platform.
And it's also it also is just useful. It's like, okay, if you're doing work in the Vision, you want to be able to track stuff in Orbit directly in Vision. You don't want to have to go back to your phone or your iPad or whatever, or your Mac. Yeah. Makes sense.
And the cool thing is that you can position it where you want. Like you probably don't want to look at a timer all the time, but you can have it behind you, and then you can turn around and see, like, wait, how much time did I track? How much have I been working on this project?
Just like, let me look at my fridge, or let me look at my clock over there. Yeah, it's fine if it's always there.
Yeah. And another thing is Mercury weather. I think there's so many things. Like, I would love to make like a completely immersive experience, but there's like different levels as well. Like, I think one thing is at the moment you can go and look at your, you can save favorite locations in the iOS and iPad app. And I think if you could actually have like a 3D globe and you can see your 3D favorite locations, you can see what time zone they're in, and you can see maybe even like a small animation of what the weather is like there. Like, that would be really cool. And then the other two are like two completely new things. We want to make something similar to something that where you get dropped in a location and it's more of a game, and you compete with your friends and figuring out which location you're in. Similar to it's inspired by the GeoGuessr game, where you get dropped somewhere and you have to figure out, and it sort of immerses your entire space. And then something else is it depends a bit on the SDKs, but I think we want to have like a gravity-focused 3D puzzle that just has more and more levels, and you can just continue progressing through it. So
and it takes place around you in your real room, and I think especially at the start, it's going to be nice to have these simple apps and games just to teach people the technology. Like, you can pick this up and it falls and it lands on your couch, and it falls off your couch or something.
And the cool thing with this is that I think we touched a bit on it with games not being a focus, but I don't think that means that it's not it's not a device where you can't have those type of games. I think there's just a different experience. Like you might not play Resident Evil on there from day one, but they're definitely
no, but you say
smaller
puzzle games.
Yeah.
I recently saw this movie Her again. Have you seen the movie Her?
I haven't, but someone recommended it after I told them about the Vision Pro.
Yeah, and there's this scene where basically he has projectors in his room and they project the game in his room. And he basically controls the character by doing this. And then the character's in front of him and he can pick up the character and like turn around. And like those kind of interactions you can perfectly do with your hands. It's just like new and different. We'll just have to get used to it.
Yeah. So what about you? Yeah. What are you going to build?
Yeah, so I made a little list of things I want to build, but I'm already noticing some I maybe won't be able to do. So I have this app called Suzy that like tracks allergies. So you can like look at a product label with your phone and it highlights the words that you cannot have. But we won't have access to the camera, so I probably won't be able to make that. I made an app 1.5 years ago called Navi, which adds subtitles and translation to FaceTime. And I think that will be really cool to bring back, but then in AR, where you can basically just see like live what the other person in the room is saying. And you can just do that, like live translate that as well, which can be useful for if you're deaf, for example. And I guess if you're deaf, put on the headset and all of a sudden you can just see what the people around you are saying. So I think that will be like a fun thing. I can reuse a lot of codes and just experiment there with, okay, how do interactions with other people work? When the iPhone 12 Pro came out, I bought it because of the LiDAR sensor, because I wanted to make an app that would like track your room, and then you open your room and you just look at your HomeKit devices and then control them that way.
I thought you had a demo for that.
And I picked that code up again, and it works a lot better now in the new AR kit. And I would imagine like because how this is probably going to work is you scan your room gets scanned, and then you position your windows and your volumes at different places, and they actually stick to those places. And so there's multiple places. So let's say you have your office there, you can have different apps there in different positions. So hopefully we'll be able to just like walk through our house, position like, all right, there's a lamp here, there's a fridge here, there's a lock here, and then from that point on, they just live in your space, and you just have to look at them, pinch, and then you can turn on your light or turn off your light. So I think those things will just be fun to play around with. And I mean, the 3D stuff, it's very hard for me to figure out like how to do 3D stuff. Like I'm playing around with a little bit of Reality Kit, but there's not a lot of tutorials right now for this iOS Reality Kit. So hopefully a lot of the SDK and the documentation that comes out at the end of the month will also focus on getting people up to speed with, okay, how do you just take a 3D object and like let it move around or like attach it to an object. And I would assume that's like a very common use case. So I hope there's going to be some good like examples for that. But I definitely think that once I have the SDK, just to try out some ideas, and then hopefully to get a dev kit later in the year and just walk around with it for a day and just walk around the house and like, oh, what would I want to do? What would I expect to have here? And it's probably going to be a lot of simple stuff as well. Like maybe it will just be fun to put like a photo of my friends on the wall. I don't think the photo app has that. So maybe I'll just make a little app where you can just put really nice little frames on your wall.
Yeah, like, I feel the same with huge, like but post-it notes or like some notes for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
You just want to remember something for a presentation you're giving or something and just put it up there.
Exactly. Or you could like pin a website to the wall, and then when you walk there, the website loads and you can see the website. I don't know. There's just all these things that are very hard to imagine without having this device and like actually, okay, what is it like to wear this for more than 20 minutes, right? And what is it like to actually walk around in your house? So,
it's hard. Like some people have asked that as well. Like how do you feel about using it the whole day? And like I would love to be able to use it the whole day. I see like if I could just use this as my new way of working, I would do that. And I did not have any problems over half an hour. But I really can't tell. I think 2 hours would be fine. The good thing with this device is that you can move around. Like when I sit at a computer, I'm very stationary. I need to sit in a certain way. I could lay down and use it if I want to.
And so hopefully it will really just be like, okay, there's a window here, but it's not obstructing your view as long as you position it there, right? Like if you position a big window here, you're probably not going to see a room. But yeah, so like the next step would be the SDK at the end of the month, and then at some point Apple is going to open up these official like compatibility tests where you can basically send in a request for, hey, this is my app, can you see if it runs? I'm not sure if that's like the default app or you'll have to submit a test flight or something, but I imagine it needs to be like an optimized app. And then there are some labs across the whole world. There's 6 different locations where like apps that like maybe show potential or like apps that like make good use, you'll get invited or something. I don't know. We don't know anything about this process.
Where's the closest one to you? Is it in Hamburg?
There's one in London and there's one in Munich. So I'm actually Munich. Close to 2 actually, which is quite nice.
And you think you would try to get a spot?
Well, obviously I don't know how this process works, but it would make sense for me to just try to get something ready for day one. So I would want to like be super active in the development there. But I would assume I'm not the only one, and I can assume that these labs are going to be very like limited in space.
Yeah.
And then at some point there's
I think you're saying the same thing.
The dev kit.
I think that would be very interesting to like just get more details about. I really don't know when that will happen as well, and I do think it is like we know the device isn't going to be released until next year, so I do think it's nice that we can focus on iOS 17 and Mac OS.
Just get that stuff out the door first, and then and then move over to the
But I'm itching to get started. I'm like, I went back to build something in like one of, like I love all the apps I'm working on, but it was a bit boring to work on 2D apps.
Like, especially that week of WWDC, like there was not a lot of other stuff that was interesting besides the vision stuff, even though there was a lot of nice announcements, but
Well, I mean, this was a huge Swift UI year, so like there's so many things there, but I think...
but I did not think about them at all for that first week, just because we got to try it. So definitely exciting. So I'm really looking forward to at the end of the month. So maybe once the SDK's been out for a few weeks, we can do another one of these sessions where we talk a little bit more about our experience there, looking back at it. I hope this was useful for people.
I hope so too. And I think we did have a plan to answer a lot of questions. I think we answered some things. One thing I wanted to point out, people asked about motion sickness. I didn't feel any motion sickness or any dizziness afterwards, which I sometimes do with those, like with
the other
VR.
ones, I do have that as well. Yeah,
but in this, there's no problem at all.
Awesome. I mean, obviously it's 30 minutes, so this is not conclusive evidence, but it seemed like it worked really well from that point of view. So and like some of the other questions, like windows overlapping, they bump into each other, I think. So you cannot like put them through a wall. There's like all these things work just as you would expect them to work with real objects, I would say. And
they animate very smoothly. If they would overlap, they just sort of changes where they lay out naturally.
Exactly. So once the SDK is out, I think we'll be able to really like give it a good try, and then go a little bit deeper into those interactions, because you don't really remember them 1.5 weeks later, right? Because it's like,
and I'm so excited.
So,
all
same.
Right.
Cool.
I can't wait to talk more about it. I could continue for like hours, but we gotta get going. So thank you so much.
Let's do that next month when we actually have had some hands-on time with the simulator.
Yeah, this was really fun. All right.
Nice.
And thanks everyone for watching, listening. Chat
like and subscribe, all that stuff.
Awesome.
All right.